On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about APIs, Application Programming Interface. What is an API? Why is an API important? And what makes an API different? All that and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control.
A State of Control, episode 109. Leave the back door unlocked. Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control programming and automation aspects of the audiovisual industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us today. So on today's show, we have a topic that I enjoy in particular, and it involves a commonly used term that I think requires a little bit of clarification because it can be misunderstood or misused. And the acronym that I'm talking about is an API, and that's also known as an application programming interface. And so to discuss that, we'll get into the details of it and dissect it a bit. Our two guests, one is a newcomer and the other is a returning guest. And before I introduce them, I get to say hello to my partner here at A State of Control, Rich Fregosa. Uncle Richie, how are you, Rich?
I'm doing good, brother. It's good to see you. It's actually, I think we haven't really had much time to chat since the last time we recorded, but you've been slightly busy, so
yes, sir.
Your free time has been used up quite a bit. But no, good to see you, and actually glad to get to chat with these gentlemen. So I'm looking forward to this one, and kudos on entering the show with breaking down the acronym, because as the rule states, you cannot list it unless you explain it.
Absolutely. Who can't depart from the AVNation traditions. So let's introduce our guests today. The first comes to us from the Pacific Northwest. He is an AV industry veteran and an expert programmer, and his name is Nick Miller. Welcome, Nick.
Hi, Steve. Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. It's been a bit since Nick was here, but his last episode was episode 96. You know, everybody's busy, but we're glad to have him back, and he's always a great contributor to the show. And last but not least, we get to welcome a newcomer, somebody who is a listener of our show and also works with Neil Silver, who's been with us a couple of times from LCD Control Systems. His name is Tony Howard. Welcome, Tony.
Hi, Steve. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Tony, if you can't tell, comes to us from Italy, actually. So thanks for staying up late and being with us.
It's all right. Origins from Australia, but I find myself now here in Italy talking to you guys. So very happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate that and glad that we can reach people across the globe. So as I mentioned at the top, the term API is come up quite a bit in conversations. We talk about it when we're trying to do device integration. We talk about it when we're trying to build interoperable systems. I mean, an API has really been the key element to making devices talk to each other. But back in the day, when Rich and I were doing this, API it wasn't really something that was used. We were doing RS-232 control, and we were using what was called a control protocol. And we used to reach out to a manufacturer and try to get sometimes a faxed document that had the commands that you needed to make a product talk. So Rich, I'll let you reminisce with me together, but let's talk about what's the main difference in what, is API just a grown-up term, or what are we talking about now as opposed to what we were working with when we were talking about a control protocol back in the day?
Well, I got to say that Nick actually remembers the pain as much as we do as well. I mean, this goes back to the days of us hand soldering VGA cables, and sitting there with 25-pin cables and, sitting with the soldering iron and making things work. I mean, in a word, yes, it's the grown-up protocol. When we were first starting out, inter-system communication was, I mean, you were literally having to beg, plead, and borrow to find ways, because all of the manufacturers are like, no, this is our secret sauce. I mean, we even went to the point where I remember, oh gosh, late 90s, we didn't even have the protocol. The manufacturer, working with the pool manufacturer, we wrote their module. They just said, here's the RS485 network that goes to our keypad, and here's what it does communicating back and forth. So they're like, here you go. This is how this thing works. If you want to make it talk to something else, go for it, and that was the days of not only getting the fax, but having to fax the NDAs to all of these manufacturers, because it was really about, they were just so fearful that if the information got out, that somebody was going to go ahead and copy their secret sauce. And also, there was no network communication. So you were physically wired with a transmit or receive, a ready to send and a clear to send. If you were lucky, it was a 9-pin cable. I remember some of the old ones were the 25-pin modem cables in between. And, you can tell somebody who was in the industry pre-internet, basically, when the first things that pop in the back of their mind was like, did you swap 2 and 3? If the words, did you swap 2 and 3 came out of your mouth, you've been doing this for a while. And so, yeah, the beginning of it was, and again, just like it continues to happen in the industry, the only reason why the API came about is because the tech industry forced that movement towards opening up the application protocols. It wasn't by choice that the manufacturers did it, because they were still dealing with that sense of, the walled garden. But like everything else, it was like, well, the greater tech industry is doing this. There's more and more pressure, not from the integrator community, but from the tech community, to be able to access it. And honestly, for me, I really felt that where the tipping point was Cisco. When Cisco decided that, yeah, okay, we're gonna actively work and publish, not document, but publish the ways to make these things work together. I really felt that that's kind of, everybody else kind of followed suit and went, okay, well, if they're doing it, we don't really have the choice to say, we can't do it anymore. But yeah, it's an evolution. I think it's an opening. I think it was an inevitable movement that occurred because it went far beyond the AV integration side of things. It was more a matter of, you've got building managers, IT managers, you've got all of these other companies that are saying, hey, if you're going to be on our network, we need to at least be able to find out what the heck you're doing, SNMP, right? Just all of these ways to be able to say, hey, if you're going to play with us, you're playing by our rules, and we need to know what it is. And if we need to ask you or interrogate you or any of these things, you need to have a way to communicate. And I think, fortunately, what it did is it opened it up for us. I don't think it was by design that the API opened to us. I think it just was, there were pressures to create it, and some manufacturers have embraced it, and some manufacturers are still dealing with it begrudgingly.
Nick, I'll kind of pass it over to you, and I'm glad that you can relate to our conversation here, even though you're definitely younger than us. But tell us a little bit about what is important about an API when a manufacturer goes to develop one. What are some of the things that are critical, and what makes an API effective?
It really comes down to 2 things for me: structure and documentation. Consistency of structure and how you go about communicating with a device or a platform, whatever the case may be, and then documenting that. I think one leads to the other. A solid foundation and structure and consistent methodology of how a device is implemented leads to good documentation, which leads to ease of implementation from a developer perspective.
And I'll add to that, putting in examples is always good. Because sometimes when you leave something open to interpretation, not everybody reads things the same way. And the importance of that too, just to kind of elaborate a little bit, is that a lot of times developers don't have the product in front of them when they're working with an API. They actually have to develop against a document versus test against the product. It's nice to have the product, but you don't always have it. Tony, I'll bring you in on this. What are the different characteristics of an API that are really make one different, or differentiate them from each other? What is something that you look for, and what because they're not all the same. There really is no standard when it comes to an API.
I think, just like Nick mentioned, I really start to look for, first of all, documentation. And when I'm actually looking at the documentation, I will find some of those characteristics in have they actually put forward their intention with the API? Why were they releasing this API? Was it for me to use even? Perhaps it was just something I found somewhere in the back end. Then further into that, I want to start sort of getting into a little bit of some of the limitations of that API. So I will look at those characteristics and say, how well was that documented? How many times could I call in an hour that I could use this particular function? Or if it was for a cloud, what sort of user base did I need to have? Some of the characteristics I'm looking for then is also beyond that, actually saying how portable is it? Can I just go and take any REST sort of system that I've got already in place for another API and use it on this API? Or am I going to have to reinvent the wheel before I can start implementing this API in my code?
Rich, coming back around, when we work with the manufacturer and you digest their API, what are, we talked a little bit about limitations, and we talked a little bit about the documentation and so forth. What should somebody who doesn't understand an API know about it? So a lot of times that it becomes a standard answer. We have an API, great, but that's not a solution. The solution is being able to know how to implement it, but also know how to get what you need from it. So what should people know about, or what questions should they be asking when this topic comes up?
Well, I mean, it's twofold. One, and I kind of go back to when you and I were in Barcelona, and we had the opportunity to talk to one of the engineers who was responsible for a product, and he was responsible for the API. And sometimes what you get the backstory on is that the engineers, for the most part, really want to provide a robust API or protocol. Like, they actively want to. The guys who are like writing the machine level code for these devices, they just don't always have the time or have been given the priority list access to develop it. And so one of the things that we've talked about is that, like, we're on this side saying, hey, we need this, hey, we need this, hey, we need this. It's not necessarily that the manufacturer's turning a deaf ear to it. It's just that on their priority list of all of the things that they need to do, a lot of times the API doesn't bubble up to the top. And it gave me an appreciation, honestly, when I was dealing with manufacturers a little bit more than before, because I even though I knew it, it didn't resonate with me that, like, hey man, these guys probably aren't trying, but there's only so many hours in the day that they can do it, and they probably want to do it. And so it became, it changed the direction of, instead of why aren't you giving me what I want, it was, how can I partner with you to get you to the other side as well? And like, in dealing with some of the manufacturers coming on, I've broached it in a way now to kind of the help me help you version, which is, hey, look, I know that you're getting these requests for X, Y, and Z, and I know that there's a way to get this verbose, rich information, because, hey, look, from the back end, us, the geeks, we're like, we want the information, we want everything. I may never use this, I just like knowing that it's there, right? I really like knowing that it's there, right? I want to know the hue coming back from this projector. Most people don't even know what hue is, but the fact is, they want to know, they want to be able to control it in the first place. So my conversations, and again, you do this more than I do. I mean, obviously you guys are in active third-party development, but when I'm dealing in a one-on-one or something, my approach as of late has been, hey, look, it's been the triage approach. we can go down the sophisticated API route and feature rich and all of these things. But I'm like, how about let's make it easy? How about let's take a look at somebody that's something. I'm like, can you just generate simple ASCII code for on and off? X or Y. Can you just provide some of these things that you don't have to go too far into it, but just, a call and response. It's like, I call it the row your boat, right? Can you just give me the call and response of what I'm asking for? It's like, on, off, right? That's really all I'm looking for. And then going with them to say, now, what we would love is this, and this. The hard part right now, and I think that manufacturers are dealing with it more than us, and we're now starting to feel the pain from it, is like, all of a sudden they start talking about OAuth, or they start talking about security and single keys. And, now because these devices are exposed on their network, the first thing that they have to do is secure their device, because they're the ones that are liable. They're the actual box that's still plugging back in. And then basically, the fight is that we're saying, hey, we know you've got this secure system that you've spent years trying to make sure that you're not a breach point and a vulnerability. Can you just open up the back door and let us in? And I won't tell anybody. I'm not going to tell anybody, but just leave the back door unlocked. It'll be cool. It's just be between friends. And the biggest thing that I've learned about APIs right now is as integrators, we have to operate with more empathy. And that's the thing, is that we're like, I want, but we're not having the conversation of what are your roadblocks as a manufacturer, and how can and I think that's where you find your success. A successful third-party person is saying, hey, look, you've got a problem. I'm walking in with the solution. I'm not asking you to make the solution. I'm already meeting you past halfway. And I think that causes the integrator, the developer, or whatever, to really think about their stuff, think about their process, get to know the manufacturer that they're dealing with, and then change the dynamic. You just change the conversation at that point. So, kind of what you're talking about is, where are you at? It's not the bits and bytes. Every product's going to be different. We already know that. But there are new layers, because these are internet connected devices. And the minute that you have an internet connected device, you have a vulnerability point, and you have to be sensitive to that first. Know that there are compromises, and then, it's like everything else, right? It's basic rules of business, right? Don't come at me with problems. Come at me with solutions. If you come at me with a solution, I'm going to be more open to what you're saying. And that's kind of the life lesson from a control systems programmer, is you got to get out of the me. You got to go into we.
Nick, I wanted to touch on something that Rich said, and also kind of take it a little bit further. Is, when we talk about API, we're talking about network controlled devices. So, but the thing that's important, and like Rich said, they didn't just develop the API for us. There's an API is used for so many other things, and I don't believe everybody understands that. Talk a little bit about that, and kind of give us some perspective on why an API is developed, and what are some other uses of it beyond just having a control programmer interface with it.
Absolutely. There's a multitude of reasons to have a robust and performant API beyond just control system programming. Hey, I want to make this button do that on that device over there. It's, as Tony was alluding to, and Rich, I think, also touched on it, monitoring and management. When you've got sysadmins that want to know every device that's connected to their network, and rightfully so. They're responsible for maintaining their business operations in a lot of cases. So management of their overall ecosystem, controlling the device, life cycle of a product, how consistent are software updates and firmware updates and things like that. one of the biggest things I look for in an API, that's a key indicator in how robust an API is, or how much time a manufacturer spent developing an API, is the consideration of asynchronous notifications or asynchronous communication. Is this a product where I have to query it every second, every 30 seconds, every 5 minutes, whatever the case may be? Or is there a means of establishing communication, maintaining that connection, and getting updates as the device needs it? Because a lot of times we're working with devices and platforms where we're not the only point of control. There may be a lighting system that is connected to an app or connected to a cloud service or a management platform, things of that nature. And things are changing outside of our small little silo, our small little corner of the world, and we need to know about those things, or it's good when we do, so that we can act upon them, we can respond to them, and just overall, it makes our systems that we're developing that much more robust.
I just wanted to add to Richard's and Nick's comment around the breadth of an API, because one of the other things an API could do is it could introduce you to a completely new market. So you've built this box, it's an amplifier, and the amplifier is doing its thing, it's amplifying some audio. But actually, if the API was to support a whole heap of other things, maybe input monitoring, all sorts of various things, actually it's opened up a brand new market for that particular product. And that's what a really good API can do. Obviously, they need to spend the time to make it a very wholesome API that takes care of all the functionality inside their box. But that's a real benefit to making a good API.
All of us on this call are tinkerers by nature. That's kind of the nature of how we got into this business. So we've all made different devices and different things do things that they weren't originally intended to do, and that's a result of engineering of an API and being able to take a device and take it and look at it and say, hey, you know what? I can actually make that do something the manufacturer may not have ever thought of. And so going back to Rich's help me help you, that can open up avenues that the manufacturer didn't think was a market play for them. So it kind of all comes back to openness and capabilities.
Even for Neil and I, we've been implementing APIs in our own products for various university projects and all sorts of things. And we've been really surprised, and we thought about it just today. We were thinking, did we ever think we were going to use that API that we created for this completely different functionality? And now it's our bread and butter product. And we go, actually, we wouldn't have gotten there unless we sort of put that work into the API in the first place.
So Tony, talk a little bit more about the importance of having an API that you can build upon, as you mentioned, but also is backward compatible, if you will. And at the beginning of the show, Rich talked a little bit about in the past, there was a lot of undocumented control, and you used to have to kind of figure things out. And while that is something that can be done, it's to those of us who have done it, we realize what the pitfalls are. So talk a little bit about that.
Look, for us, we have a CI/CD process, so we can version all of our APIs that we create along the way, and that's the first thing. It needs to be an easy process, because if you're trying to sort of manually write it down on a Word document somewhere, you're going to be really burying yourself in an entire sort of problem, a new problem, which is just managing versions. The second thing is that power that we gained from actually creating our own API by putting that out there and then also versioning it. All of those codes that we put into all those various rooms and whatever it happened to be, they're immediately expandable. We can actually go and do things that we didn't think we were ever going to need to do, or we can go and sell more products to those particular clients and say, did you know we could also do this? Beyond that, what we're also seeing is in tender documents, they're actually asking us to implement an API. For us to deliver this project and finish this project, it needs to include an API for some sort of user interface, so that even though we might provide them with the user interface, in the future, they don't have to actually come back to us for any of that information. They can actually just take that API and implement their own user interface or their own subsystem or whatever it happens to be. They can do that on their own without us having to change anything, because they asked us to do it in the tender.
Nick, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about, for some people, an API is really what you need to do, and what you need to do your job. And it's that, we've kind of opened up the key to the castle, and we can get in and do what we need. But for some, an API is not necessarily what they need to be able to be successful if you're just programming a project. Learning and digesting and implementing an API is probably more of an could be a greater task than actually doing a project. So that opens up the conversation to modules and drivers, plugins. To talk a little bit about what those are and why they are critical to programmers.
Sure. I'm a huge proponent of developing middleware and drivers in particular to control individual devices for a number of reasons. One, it makes things much more portable and reusable. If you've got devices X, Y, and Z in a project, and then the next project you've got X, A, B, and C, you have that module, you have that driver ready to go that you can just pluck from previous project, plug it into the next one, and you get immediate economy of scale. The other thing is interoperability. As it depending on the platform, obviously, there are language libraries that could be written against specific products that are portable even from platform to platform. So you gain a lot of efficiency by developing middleware and drivers on the front end of a project. While you're doing that, you're also creating a separation of concerns and making things easier to troubleshoot in the development phase of a project. So if you run into an issue with a certain sequence, let's say you're starting up a classroom and there's 50 different operations that are happening. If one or two of those things go wrong, how do you go about troubleshooting it when you've got 50 points of attack? By having those individual driver components, you can isolate down to the individual, but just like hardware troubleshooting is what it comes down to.
Well said. That's an important part. I think of any programmer back in, I don't think anybody ever has the time that they need to complete a project, never mind learn a new product and do this type of development within the parameters of a given client need. Which I'll kind of come back to you. When we're looking ahead, what are some of the things that programmers are going to need to know, and how? And we always like to talk about what the future looks like, and also what people need to learn. What are some of the skills that are required to work with an API, get comfortable, and be able to say that I can write these modules and drivers and middleware that Nick mentioned?
I think going forward, you have a choice. You either need to learn about encryption or you need to partner with somebody who knows about encryption, because again, it's not as we have entered the IoT world. We are in it now. It's cloud is not even this, oh wow, the cloud. It is just a part of life. IoT is just a part of life. It's being taken for granted is what's happened. We've reached that tipping point where the assumption is that you have a connected device, and the markets of silos is shrinking, and they're very specific places: government, banking, medical, right? Those are kind of the last 3 points of the pyramid where you already know by design that the vulnerabilities have been accounted for, typically by being physically separated from the greater world. Now let's move to the 98% of the systems that are out there. You don't want to be, the HVAC system plugged into Target that gets exposed and comes through. Because again, and you're seeing it, because if you're in this industry and if you don't have your cybersecurity policies and if you don't have your omission clauses built in, those are the things now that it's like, if your device is connected to the greater world and you are connected to another device that potentially could have vulnerabilities, whether you knew it or not, because that's how the world works. It didn't happen like the way you intended it. It's like nobody goes out in the street and expects to get mugged. I mean, it's not like, I'm waking up today, hey, there might be a mugging happening, right? So the defense is encryption, and more there are laws being passed now, even for simple things like password protection. In California, you cannot plug in an electronic device and put it on a computer network without first at least changing the default password. It's simple stuff like that people are understanding. It's like, oh, I can't leave the back door open anymore. In our instances, and the manufacturers that we're dealing with, they're going to be forced into security, and you're not going to be able to disable it. We're still in that middle point where you can work with manufacturers and say, security, maybe not, right? But going forward, those doors are going to get closed more and more as time happens. And so you're going to have to, again, you got a choice. You either invest in figuring it out, or you partner, or you hire. And all of those are good. It's not bad to partner or get somebody who does what they do. Guess what? That's what the tech industry does, right? And so that's the big thing, is shaking off as a control systems programmer that you have to do everything, that everything has to reside with you, that if it's not in your knowledge base, it's not important. We got to get past that. I've been guilty of it, But for me, it's the equivalent of, I was thinking about, as we were talking about the old days, there was a company literally called Black Box. That was the name of the company, Black Box. And they made just all the widgets of there used to be, I was laughing. I was thinking about, like, when we were writing the protocol, I had to buy a little device that was between my computer, that was between the pool controller and the keypad. And then it siphoned off the signal that I could bring into my computer so that I could watch back and forth. It was the original Wireshark. Mm-hmm. The good news is that you don't have to be the tinkerer anymore if you don't want to be. You can, and you can do cool stuff, and there's market opportunities, and there's businesses to be built off of tinkering. Absolutely. Those are your niches and riches. But the greater industry, if you're in commercial, if you're in education, if you're doing boardrooms, if you're doing huddle spaces, if you're doing X, Y, or Z, where you're going to make your money as a control systems programmer is coming in as a unique solutions provider. And again, if it's all about business, you learn it and you invest in it and you create something that's yours, like Tony's doing, and like Nick is doing, and like you're doing, or you partner and you ally and, you create something that comes out of it, and hey, everybody gets a piece of the pie. That's cool. And so for control systems programmer, your business model going forward has to be a lot more about collaboration than sitting in that silo. And because those opportunities are there, and it's going to be a certain point where you're going to be forced to make the choice. It's not just going to be, I feel like doing it. It's going to be like, no, this sucker's closed. And again, like I said, if you don't understand encryption and one-time keys, or, anything that's going on like that, you're host. You can make it work once, but 3 months later, once it breaks and the key breaks and you have no way to asynchronously keep that communication, you ain't gotten called back. You're not getting that client anymore. And that's the reality, which is like, oh, I can make it once. I walked through, I did the dog and pony show. See, we made the call. 3 months later, system's not working. You only get so many chances with that one.
I can say it's actually quite liberating once you sort of shake off your control system programming mentality and you start to get to play with all the big toys and all the normal, like, web dev kind of APIs and all these sorts of things, because you actually do, your mentality changes. And also there's a new line of staff you can possibly hire, because you're no longer actually just dealing with a control systems programmer. You're actually got a normal training street, like university studied software engineers who know what they're doing, and there's many more of them to be able to help you provide the solution you're looking for.
And Tony makes a good point that the fear is that by bringing in outside people, it's going to put you out of a job. It's not. It's not going to put you out of a job. It makes you more valuable. If you're working for a company, it shows your growth pattern. If you own the company, it's going to be what helps you survive.
And that's one of the biggest competitive advantages I see for some of us old dog control system programmers, is that knowledge base of the category that we work with, of the devices that we've been working with. I've always told people when asked about how to get into control system programming, or what I look for in a control system programmer if I were out hiring one. And I always say I would rather take an AV technician that has intimate knowledge of products that they work with on a day-to-day basis, give them a little bit of training on the software development side, and cut them loose as a control system programmer, as opposed to coming at it from the other direction, where you have a pure computer science grad coming out of college that could go to work for Google or Facebook or Apple, any of the FANG companies, but they have no knowledge of the products that we typically work with. That's going to be a much steeper learning curve in my mind.
We quite specifically try and silo them off, actually. Internally, we kind of don't want them getting really bogged down in all the control system stuff. We go, oh, look, at some point I might want you to compile this in .NET framework something, but that's as far as I want you to know about it. That's as much as I want you to know. And that's how we kind of keep them a bit siloed off.
Well, thank you, guys. That's probably a good place for us to stop. But I like those final parting words, because I think it's good for us to provide that clarity and also give our audience some things to think about. And it's been a ongoing conversation for years. So I think we provided a lot of insight there. So I'd like to thank you guys all for being part of the show. Nick Miller, how can people get in touch with you, learn more about what you're up to?
You can find me on all the various socials at Nick Mill. And yeah, thanks for having me, Steve.
Thanks for being here. It's great to see you. And Tony Howard from LCD Control Systems. How could people get in touch with you and learn more about LCD? And thanks for being here for the first time. It was great having you.
It has been a real pleasure to be here. And you can find me at lightingcontrol.co.uk or LinkedIn, or even Instagram at Tech by Tony, I think is my handle. So not much on there yet, though, I don't think.
Great. Well, thanks. We'll look forward to having you back. And last but not least, Rich, how can people get in touch with you, learn what you're up to, and any final thoughts you wanted to share?
Fregosa Design is the company. You can find the webpage at Fregosa across the various socials. But first and foremost, I got to put it in here. Where I hope you find me is here on AVNation.tv and our suite of shows here with my partner Steve, and all of our other shows, AV Week, Resi Week, that fill all of our verticals. That would make me happy if you find us here and find us on our other shows.
Well said, and always want to promote our shows, and also recently I was on Resi Week, hosted actually by our producer Mitchell Toulin. So please check that out on episode 394. But all the shows that AVNation family provide a lot of not only great content, but also insight into other personalities in the industry. So check those out at avnation.tv. Please also reach out to the sponsors who support the shows, and thank them for helping us put these shows on. For us, you can please leave a comment, a rating, review. We'd like to hear from you. We're also looking to make sure that our audience is getting the coverage that they're looking for and the topics that they would like discussed. So if you have any ideas, suggestions, or want to be on the show, please reach out to Rich or me. And you can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on social media. You can reach me, my company, Control Concepts, at controlconcepts.net. And I also have another podcast that I do with James King called Ask the Programmer. And that's another complement to this show, which just continues the discussion about different topics in AV programming and control. And with that, this has been A State of Control.